The recording starts mid-sentence. That is the first thing Valora notices when he pulls the archive file from the restricted database. Not the content, not the classification level stamped across every frame in emergency red, but the fact that it begins asterisk mid-sentence. Someone had been speaking before whoever held the device thought to start recording. Something was already happening. Whatever the beginning was, it has been lost. And in 32 years of serving as the Empire's senior cultural analyst, Valora has learned that the things lost before a recording begins are almost always the things that matter most. He sets down his cooling drink. On the screen, a human is talking. 3 hours. That is the total duration of the 9th Galactic Empire's ground campaign on the human homeworld. From first atmospheric insertion to the moment Imperator Fleet Commander Soreth Dahl issued the emergency extraction order, 3 hours passed. The official record lists the campaign as a tactical repositioning following adverse environmental assessment. The classified record, the one Valora is currently reading with hands that have begun, quietly and without his permission, to tremble, uses different language entirely. The classified record uses the word asterisk catastrophe 17 times in 4 pages. It uses the word asterisk incomprehensible asterisk 9 times. It uses the phrase asterisk we do not understand what they did twice, and both times the sentence ends there, with no further elaboration, as though whoever wrote it could not bring themselves to continue. Valora pauses the recording of the human mid-sentence. He looks at the timestamp. He looks at the duration counter. 3 hours and 11 minutes of raw footage, pulled from 17 separate imperial recording devices, stitched together in sequence. He has been authorized to view this material as part of the Post-Contact Reassessment Commission, a body convened 6 weeks after the campaign ended, or rather, 6 weeks after the campaign stopped, because ended implies a conclusion, and what happened on the human world did not conclude so much as it simply asterisk ceased to be survivable for the Empire's forces. He presses play. He has absolutely no idea what he is about to see. Neither did Soreth Dahl. The insertion began at 600 local human time, which the Empire's pre-campaign analysis had identified as optimal. Early morning. Most biological organisms are at their lowest cognitive and physical capacity in the hours immediately following sleep. The Empire had conquered 47 worlds. The pattern held across every species they had encountered. Strike at dawn, overwhelm before full wakefulness, accept surrender before the defending population could organize resistance. Fleet Commander Soreth Dahl stood at the forward observation post and watched the first dropships descend through a pale orange sky, and what he felt was not triumph, exactly. It was closer to administrative satisfaction. Humanity had been assessed. Their technology was 2 centuries behind the imperial standard. Their political structures were fragmented. Their military, while surprisingly numerous for a species their age, was divided across dozens of competing nation-states with no unified command architecture. The assessment report had used the phrase asterisk low resistance acquisition target. "Sir," said Subcommander Vane at his side, watching the dropship's thermal trails streak across the horizon. "Ground teams report they are receiving communications from the human settlement below." "What are they saying?" Vane was quiet for a moment, listening to the translation feed in his earpiece. Then he said, carefully, "They're asking us to land in a specific location. They say they've prepared a reception area." Dahl turned to look at his subcommander. "They're telling us where to land." "Yes, sir." A silence passed between them. Dahl looked back at the descending dropships and felt something he had not expected to feel, a faint, sourceless unease. It was not the human's defiance that unsettled him. Defiance was common, especially in the first moments of contact. What unsettled him was the tone of the transmission. He had not heard the original audio yet, only Vane's summary, but the sub-commander's expression carried something unfamiliar. "What's the translation confidence?" Dahl asked. 94%. "And they're not threatening us?" "No, sir, Vane paused. "They sound almost cheerful asterisk." The dropships continued their descent. On the ground below, in the specific location the humans had designated, a single person stood at the edge of a cleared field, holding something in their hand. From this altitude, from the observation post's magnification, it looked like a small rectangular object. Dahl ordered enhanced imaging. The object was a paper cup. The human below was drinking from it. Her name was Sergeant Yale Morrow, and she had been awake for 26 hours. She had not slept because there was no point in sleeping when you are the designated first contact liaison for an alien invasion fleet that has been hanging in your sky for 4 days, making increasingly specific demands for unconditional surrender. You either sleep or you prepare. Yale Morrow had prepared. The coffee was the last cup from the last functional machine in the forward operations bunker, and she drank it standing in the field because she wanted to be the first thing the aliens saw when they landed, and she wanted that first thing to be a human being standing upright in the open, in daylight, with nothing in their hands except a paper cup. Optics mattered. Her commanding officer had said that. Everyone above her pay grade had said something similar, usually with more technical language, but the core of it was always the same. The first 10 seconds are everything. She had been chosen for this because she spoke 4 languages and had a background in crisis negotiation, and because someone in the chain of command had reviewed her psychological profile and selected the word asterisk unflappable in a memo. A word Yale privately felt was over-optimistic given that she was currently watching 17 alien dropships descend toward her face. But she stood in the field. She finished her coffee. "Morrow," the voice in her earpiece was Colonel Price, watching from the observation bunker half a kilometer behind her. "We're getting telemetry on their landing configuration. They're splitting the formation. 6 ships to your north, 6 to your east, 5 holding altitude." "The 5 holding altitude are fire support platforms," she said. "Not a question." "That's our assessment." "So they're planning to talk from a position of covered fire." "Yes." Yale looked at the descending ships. She looked at the paper cup in her hand. She dropped it on the ground, which she felt bad about because she hated littering, and then she put both hands in her pockets. "Tell them," she said, "that we appreciate the landing formation, and that if they're worried about ground-level threats, the safest thing for their fire support platforms to do is move to 2,000 meters altitude rather than 800. A silence in the earpiece. "Morrow," Price said, "we are not giving tactical advice to the invasion fleet." "We're telling them we know what their ships are," she said. "That's not advice, that's a signal." "A signal of what?" She watched the nearest dropship's landing struts extend toward the field. The ground shook. The air smelled like ionized metal and something underneath it, something almost sweet, that she did not have a name for yet. "That we've been paying attention," she said. The recording catches the landing from 4 angles. Valora watches the footage with the transcript running in a secondary window, cross-referencing the alien dialogue, his people's dialogue, the Empire's dialogue, against the human responses. The translation software flags 17 points in the first 20 minutes of contact, where the confidence rating drops below 60%, not because the human words are unclear. Because the intent behind them does not map to any behavioral model, the translation matrix was designed to accommodate. The first flagged exchange occurs 4 minutes after landing. Fleet Commander Dahl steps from the primary dropship in full ceremonial command armor, flanked by 6 honor guard soldiers in tactical formation. This is standard imperial contact protocol: display of authority, display of military capability, invitation to recognize hierarchy. The human, the single human in the field, looks at him, looks at the honor guard and says something. The translation matrix renders it as long trip. The confidence rating on that phrase is 41%. Dahl, according to the footage, pauses. The translator and his team interprets it differently, converts it to a formal recognition greeting, and renders it back to Dahl as, "The journey was observed," which is contextually meaningless but sounds appropriately deferential, and so Dahl responds with the standard acknowledgement of authority, a 3-line declaration of imperial sovereignty and the terms of immediate surrender. The human listens to the full declaration. Then she says, "Could you say that again? We want to make sure we have a clean recording." Dahl says it again. She thanks him. Later, reviewing the footage, Valora will circle this moment with the notation. She was not confused. She was documenting. Why was she documenting? He will not have an answer for 3 more hours of footage. The first misinterpretation took hold within minutes of landing. Imperial ground troops had fanned out to their designated positions around the central contact zone, and their sensors were picking up human movement throughout the surrounding terrain. Dozens of humans moving through the tree lines and structures at the settlement's edge, some carrying equipment, some simply present, watching. Sub-Commander Vane reported to Dahl that their initial population assessment had been wrong. They had expected a cleared zone, a formal surrender delegation, perhaps a small security detail. Instead, the sensors were reading between 200 and 400 individual humans within a 1-kilometer radius. "They've mobilized a defensive perimeter," Vane said. Dahl studied the sensor data. The humans were not armed, or at least, the sensors registered no large metallic objects consistent with weapons in most of their hands. Some carried small devices. Many carried nothing visible at all. "A civilian defensive perimeter," Dahl said slowly. "It appears so. They've sent civilians to form a perimeter around a first contact negotiation with a superior military force." A pause. "Yes, sir." What neither Dahl nor Vane understood, what the imperial analysis framework had no category for, was that the humans in the tree lines and on the building rooftops and along the settlement's edges were not a defensive perimeter. They were witnesses. They were journalists. They were ordinary people who had driven through the night from cities hundreds of kilometers away because they wanted to see this happen with their own eyes. They had brought cameras and children and folding chairs. Some of them had brought sandwiches. The Empire had encountered fearful species and defiant species, and resigned species and species that attacked immediately out of territorial reflex. They had never encountered a species whose population, upon being informed that an alien fleet had arrived to demand their unconditional surrender, responded by trying to get a good view. Dahl, operating on the assumption that these hundreds of civilians were some form of organized human tactical response, adjusted his force deployment to account for them. He repositioned 3 fire teams. He elevated his threat assessment level. He was, in a way he would not recognize until much later, already beginning to respond to something that wasn't there, and in doing so, missing what was. Inside the forward operations bunker, Colonel Price was watching 6 screens at once. Screen 1, Morrow in the field talking to the alien commander in slow, careful sentences, her hands visible at all times. Screen 2, satellite thermal imaging of the Empire's full landing force, 12 ships confirmed, an estimated 800 to 1,200 soldiers, weapon signatures consistent with directed energy platforms and kinetic accelerators that outclassed anything in the human arsenal by a categorical margin. Screen 3, global news feed, because 37 different networks were covering this live, and the public's psychological state was a tactical variable. Screen 4, a map of the surrounding terrain, updated every 90 seconds with position reports from the human military units that were not in the field, that were not visible, that were not anywhere near the contact zone. Screen 5 was a communications channel that had been open for 19 hours without transmitting anything. Just open, waiting. Screen 6 was a timer. "They've repositioned their fire teams," said Lieutenant Kasha Verne, who was running signals intelligence from the station to Price's left. "They're treating the civilian observers as a tactical threat." "Good," Price said. Verne looked at her. "Sir, every time they try to understand what we're doing, they have to make assumptions." Price did not look away from the screens. "Every assumption they make is something they're not spending attention on." "And what should they be spending attention on?" Price was quiet for a moment. "Nothing yet," she said. "We're still in the first hour." Verne looked at Screen 5, the silent, waiting communications channel, and then looked back at her commander. She had a question she wanted to ask and had been not tasking for 19 hours. "Colonel," she said, "the timer on Screen 6 is not your concern yet," Price said. The timer read 02:07:44 remaining. Valoran pauses the recording. He rewinds. He plays the shot of Screen 6 again, the brief moment when the human bunker's interior is captured by a recovered Imperial reconnaissance drone that had slipped into a ventilation shaft in the first hour of contact. The image is blurry, captured at an angle, and the Commission's technical team had enhanced it 3 times before the numbers became legible. 02:07:44. A timer counting down from somewhere above 2 hours. He checks the timestamp. The drone captured this image at 6:21 local time, 21 minutes after first landing, which means the timer, when it began, read something close to 2 hours and 28 minutes. Which means the humans had set a countdown before the Empire landed, before first contact, before they knew how long the negotiation would take or what form it would take or how the Empire would respond. They had set a countdown to a specific moment, and they had done it in advance. Valoran writes in his notation file, what happens when the timer reaches 0? He searches the rest of the footage for the answer. He finds nothing that explains it directly, but he finds other things, dozens of other things, and each one is worse than the last. By the 40-minute mark of ground contact, Dahl had made 3 decisions that seemed, individually, entirely rational. First, he had ordered the perimeter forces to maintain observation-only posture. The civilians, he kept thinking of them as a tactical element, kept trying to assign them a strategic function, showed no signs of coordinated action. But they also showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, more kept arriving. Second, he had ordered his negotiation team to accelerate the surrender documentation timeline. The human representative, the single woman in the field who had been quietly, pleasantly, maddeningly continuing to talk with his senior translator as though they were discussing logistics rather than the subjugation of her entire species, had agreed to receive the formal surrender instruments, but had asked for them to be presented in a format that her government's legal structures could ratify. This was, his advisors told him, either a stalling tactic or evidence that the humans genuinely believed their legal frameworks remained relevant in this context. Dahl was not sure which interpretation was more concerning. Third, he had sent a 3-ship escort to do a low pass over the nearest human population center, 15 kilometers north. Standard intimidation protocol. Show the civilian population the fleet's scope, reduce the psychological appetite for resistance. The escort reported back in 11 minutes. Their report was 12 words long. Population center observed. Humans on rooftops watching the ships. Some are waving. Dahl read the report twice. Waving, he said aloud. Yes, sir, Vane confirmed. As in a greeting gesture. Our xenosociologists believe so, yes. Dahl set the report down. He looked at the field where his honor guard stood, and where the human woman was now accepting a data tablet from his senior translator, with the focused expression of someone reviewing a contract at a reasonable pace, with no apparent acknowledgement of the weapons pointed in her general direction. "What," Dahl said, slowly and with genuine bewilderment, "is wrong with them?" What Dahl could not have known, what no one outside a very small room had been told, was that Yale Morrow was managing a performance. Not a deception, a performance. There is a difference, though from the outside they can look identical. She was genuinely reviewing the surrender documents. She was genuinely nodding, with a professional calm she had constructed over 26 sleepless hours. The legal and technical language the Empire was using, the specific demands, the timeline they were imposing. She was genuinely translating these things into reports that she was quietly transmitting back to the bunker, where Colonel Price was reading them in real time. But she was also managing her body language with the precision of a concert musician managing a performance in a hall where every seat was occupied. Every gesture, every breath, every moment of eye contact with the alien commander, the tall, armor-plated figure who she privately thought looked deeply uncomfortable, which was interesting, was calibrated. She was buying time. She was buying 47 minutes of time, to be specific. Because 47 minutes was what the signal said was needed, in the message that had been sent not on any military channel, not on any governmental frequency, but through an amateur radio network of 17,000 volunteers who had been maintaining contingency communications infrastructure for 4 years, against precisely this category of event. The bunker screen 5, the channel that had been open for 19 hours. 47 minutes was what the reply had asked for. She didn't know exactly what happened in 47 minutes. She had been told only that it was important, and that her job was to keep talking, keep documenting, keep the aliens' attention on her and on the legal instruments and on the field and on the crowd of human beings who kept arriving to watch, because humans are, in the final accounting, deeply, constitutionally unwilling to miss things. She was 41 minutes into the performance when the alien commander made an error. "Your defensive emplacements to the east," Dahl said through the translator. "Our sensors have identified 47 hardened positions. We require them to be vacated and surrendered as part of initial compliance." Yale looked up from the document. She looked at the alien commander. She looked at him for a long moment, and what moved through her in that moment was not fear, exactly, but something adjacent to it, the particular adrenaline-laced clarity that comes when you realize the person across from you has revealed something they didn't mean to. He has sensors good enough to count individual emplacements. She had known this, theoretically, from the intelligence briefings, but he just told me the count. 47, which was 6 more than they had built. Which meant his sensors were counting something else as well, something his team had classified as defensive emplacements, and she had a very good idea what, because she had seen the map. And to the east of the contact zone there were, among the actual emplacements, 11 grain silos, 3 water towers, and a large electrical substation. He thought the civilian infrastructure was military hardware. She could correct him. That would be the transparent thing, the good faith thing. She took a breath. "We'll need to review that list carefully," she said. "Infrastructure categorization can be complex." It was not a lie. It was, technically, not even evasive. It was simply true in a way that did not give him the correction he needed, and she felt something complicated move through her chest as she said it, something she would think about for a long time afterward, about what you do and don't owe to someone who is trying to conquer you. "Complex," the translator rendered back to Dahl. Dahl nodded slowly. "We will provide the specific coordinates." "That would be very helpful," Yale said. In the bunker, the timer read 01:19:22. It was at the 90-minute mark that Valoran's hand stopped trembling and went very still. He had just watched the footage from the Imperial Signals Intelligence team, specifically, the moment they began intercepting human communications. This was a routine procedure, deployed within the first hour of any contact operation. The signals team was composed of the Empire's best algorithmic analysts. They had broken 17 alien communication systems in the course of the Empire's expansion. What they found when they turned their systems toward the human communications landscape was not nothing. It was not encrypted silence. It was the opposite of encrypted silence. There were so many signals, broadcasting on so many frequencies. Open, unencrypted, overlapping, continuous news broadcasts and entertainment streams and navigation systems, and emergency alerts and personal communications and orbital relays and submarine cables and shortwave and satellite, and a dozen other categories the imperial system did not have immediate classifications for. An ocean of human communication, all of it open, none of it hidden, carrying an incomprehensible volume of information in every direction simultaneously. The signals team reported to Dahl, human communications infrastructure appears unsecured, likely indicates primitive cryptographic capacity, no evidence of coordinated military communication. Dahl had accepted this assessment. What the signals team had failed to account for, what Valora can now see, reviewing the intercepts with 30 additional years of human cultural study behind him, was that hidden things and open things are not always different categories. Among the 3 billion pieces of human communication being broadcast in those 90 minutes, there were 17,000 transmissions from amateur radio operators. Each one was brief. Each one sounded in isolation, like ordinary personal communication between hobbyists at position check-ins, weather reports, signal quality tests. Together, stitched into a pattern, they were a global message relay system. They had been, for 4 years, quietly maintaining the infrastructure needed to carry exactly this kind of message: coordinates, timing, status, confirmation. The Empire's signals team had swept past them without a second analysis, because they were indistinguishable from background noise. They were background noise. They were also the most important communications network on the planet at that moment. And somewhere in that network, relayed through 17,000 voices, a message had arrived. A message that had traveled not from any military installation, not from any government command center, but from a position that the Empire would never have thought to monitor. Valora rewinds to the moment in the footage where Colonel Price looks at screen 5. The open channel, the one that had been waiting for 19 hours. He watches her face when the message arrives. She reads it, she is still for 3 seconds. Then she says to Vern, "Get me confirmation." "Vern, it's confirmed, Colonel." "Price, how long ago was that position established?" "Vern, records indicate preparation began 4 years ago. The position itself has been held for 11 days. Price closes her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opens them, she says, "They've been there for 11 days. "Vern, yes, sir." "Without resupply?" "Minimal resupply. The analysis suggests intermittent." Price says nothing for a moment. Then, God, they're patient. Valora has watched this exchange 6 times now. Each time, a different part of it lands differently. This time, it is Price's expression when she says patient. Not awe exactly, not pride, though both are present. Mostly she looks like someone who has just remembered something important about the nature of the people she is fighting alongside, and it has moved her in a way she did not expect. He still does not know what position. He still does not know who had been there for 11 days. The footage does not show it directly. But the timer on screen 6 at the moment of that exchange reads 00:47:03. Exactly the time Yale Morrow had been told she needed to buy. The second misinterpretation crystallized at the 2-hour mark, and it was this one, not the civilian observers, not the infrastructure confusion, not the communications signal assessment, that would later be identified as the moment the campaign became irretrievable. Dahl's engineers had been analyzing the structural layout of the human settlement's underground infrastructure. They had found, as expected, a network of tunnels, utility corridors, transit systems, storage facilities. Standard subterranean development consistent with a species that had been urbanizing for several centuries. They had also found something they had not expected: a series of sealed chambers at significant depth, distributed across a pattern that their spatial analysis identified as deliberately non-random. Military bunkers, the engineering team concluded, pre-positioned, hardened beyond utility requirements, possible weapons storage. Dahl ordered the bunkers flagged for immediate forced access as part of the initial compliance phase. He issued the order at 800 local time. The order would never be carried out. Because at 800 local time, the timer on Colonel Price's screen 6 reached 0, and 3 things happened so quickly that the imperial recording systems captured them as nearly simultaneous events. First, Yale Morrow stepped back 2 paces from the negotiation position, just 2 steps, a subtle thing, the kind of movement that looks like a person shifting their weight. Second, from a frequency, the Empire's communication systems were not monitoring, a frequency used historically for deep-sea geological survey, virtually never used for anything else, registered nowhere in the Imperial Signal Library. A single short burst of compressed data was transmitted from a point 80 kilometers south of the contact zone. The transmission lasted 0.4 seconds. Third, the 5 Imperial fire support platforms holding altitude at 800 meters began picking up anomalous readings from the contact zone's perimeter. Not weapons signatures, not energy signatures. Something their sensor systems had no pre-existing category for, which caused them to flag the readings as sensor malfunction, which meant they sent a diagnostic request back to the fleet's main computer, which took 11 seconds to process, which was 11 seconds during which the platform's threat response systems were in a degraded state. 11 seconds. Later, when Valora pulls the technical logs from those platforms, he will find that 11 seconds was not an accident. The anomalous readings had been specifically designed to trigger the Imperial sensor system's malfunction protocol. They had been designed by someone who had spent 4 years studying Imperial sensor technology from the scant data available in pre-contact astronomical observations, and had made, correctly, as it turned out, several key assumptions about the architecture of Imperial threat response algorithms. Someone had engineered an 11-second window. In 11 seconds, you cannot win a war. But in 11 seconds, you can make a specific call on a channel that has been open for 19 hours and say 3 words that will be received by a relay network of 17,000 people, who will pass them along a chain to a position held for 11 days by people who have been waiting without resupply in a space barely large enough to move in. People whose job is to do one thing and who are very, very good at that one thing. The 3 words were, "Echo, go now." What followed was not a battle. This is the part of the record that Valora finds most difficult to process, because he was trained in a tradition that understands conquest as a series of battles, engagements, advances, retreats, decisive moments of force meeting force. What happened on the human homeworld between 800 and 900 local time does not fit that framework. He has had to build a new one. At 8:01, the Empire's main fleet received a formal legal challenge to their right of presence in human territorial space under 7 separate frameworks of interstellar law, frameworks that the Empire had itself authored as part of the governance accords 40 years prior. The challenge was filed from 12 different human governmental entities simultaneously, cross-referenced to specific subsections of Imperial legal code, each filing time-stamped and accompanied by supporting documentation that clearly represented months of preparation. At 8:01, Not a single member of the Empire's legal staff was prepared to respond to a legal challenge. They were not in the legal response phase of the operation. They were in the *combat* phase. The filings landed in automated inboxes that were not being monitored. The filings created an official record of imperial non-response. At 8:03, the global news networks, all 37 that were covering the landing live, simultaneously received a data package from an anonymous transmission source. The package contained the full text of the Empire's surrender demands, alongside a document the Empire had never seen before, a 300-page analysis of the legal, diplomatic, and military frameworks under which the demands were internationally non-binding, cross-referenced to imperial law, authored in 3 languages, complete with citations. The document had been written 4 years ago. At 8:07, in the sealed chambers that Dahl's engineers had flagged as possible weapons bunkers, something moved. Not weapons. The sealed chambers contained people. Specifically, they contained 719 human beings who had been living in those chambers for various periods ranging from 4 days to 3 weeks, surviving on stored supplies, maintaining radio silence, breathing recycled air, waiting. They were not soldiers. They were specialists of various kinds: engineers, physicians, diplomats, translators, legal scholars, economists, and 41 people whose specific expertise Valora still cannot fully classify from the records, though the Commission has tried. They emerged from their chambers quietly, moving through human infrastructure tunnels to positions throughout the settlement that placed them in proximity to the Empire's ground troop deployments. They carried no weapons. They sat down, and they began talking. This is the part of the recording where Dahl's responses begin to lose coherence. Not because he is panicking. Valora has watched enough military footage to recognize panic, and this is not it. Dahl is a capable commander with 30 years of field experience. What he is experiencing is something different. A situation in which every action he takes produces an outcome that contradicts his model of the situation. He is trying to apply a framework that does not fit, and each application generates new evidence that the framework is wrong, and the evidence accumulates faster than he can revise the framework. The civilian elements in the tunnel system, Vane reports to him at 8:11. They are making contact with our ground units. Contact as in? Talking, sir, directly to our soldiers in our language. Dahl stops. They speak Valish. Some of them speak Valish, sir. Others are using translation devices. The devices are, Vane pauses, and the pause carries something complicated in it. The devices are using our own translation protocols, sir. They appear to have reverse-engineered our communication encryption from the transmissions we made during the approach phase. The approach phase had lasted 3 days. In 3 days, from intercepted transmissions, human engineers had reconstructed enough of the imperial communications protocol to build functional translation interfaces. What are they saying, Dahl asks, to our soldiers? Vane is quiet for a moment. They are asking about them, sir, asking where they're from, what the climate is like there, whether they miss their families. A long silence. They are, Dahl says carefully, asking our soldiers about their families. Yes, sir. The footage catches the expression on Dahl's face at this moment. Valora has studied it at length. It is not anger. It is not contempt. It is the expression of someone experiencing a profound and growing certainty that they are missing something fundamental, that there is a logic operating in this situation that they cannot see, and that their inability to see it is not a failure of intelligence but a failure of category. They have no category for what this is. They're not fighting us, Dahl says. No, sir. They're not running. No, sir. They're not surrendering. No, sir. Then what, Dahl says, with a quietness that is more unnerving than shouting, are they doing? Yale Morrow could have told him. She could have told him quite simply, in plain language, because it was not actually complicated. But he never asked her directly, and she had standing orders not to volunteer it. What the humans were doing was showing the Empire what it had not calculated for. The legal filings were showing it that this was not an uncontested acquisition, that there was a framework, constructed in advance and with great care, under which this action was formally challengeable and formally challenged, and that the Empire's own legal architecture was the mechanism of challenge. The emerging specialists were showing the soldiers what the soldiers had not been told about the people they were conquering, that they were individual beings with context, with knowledge, with faces, with the ability to ask, "Where are you from?" in your own language after 3 days of preparation, that they had prepared for this, that they had thought about it, that it mattered to them in ways that went beyond the tactical. The news feeds were showing the watching world, and by this point, every imperial ship had been informed of the global broadcast coverage, that this event was witnessed, permanently, publicly, irreversibly witnessed, that whatever happened here was already part of a record that existed outside the Empire's control. And the civilian observers, the hundreds who had come with cameras and children and folding chairs, were showing the Empire something it had perhaps never needed to see before, what it looks like when an entire species refuses to be invisible at the moment of its own potential erasure. Yale was standing in the field at 8:23 when Dahl came back to the negotiation position. He stood across from her in his full command armor, and he looked at her for a long moment in silence, and she looked back at him without looking away, and the field was very quiet. "You've been doing this for a long time," he said finally. "Not an accusation, something else." "We've had a lot of time to think about it," she said. "The chambers, the people in the tunnels." "Yes." "How long were they down there?" She considered whether to answer. "Some of them 3 weeks." He was quiet. "Without knowing if we would ever come," he said. "They knew you would come," she said. "We've known for 4 years something like this was possible. We just didn't know when. And they prepared, for 4 years, for something that might not happen. That's what you do," she said, "when something matters." She watched him process this. She watched something move through his expression, a sequence of things, one after another, too fast to separate into individual emotions. It was not surrender. It was closer to a reckoning. "Your timer," he said, "the countdown in your command post." She paused. "You had observation in the bunker." Briefly, what was the countdown? She told him the truth because they were past the point where it mattered to withhold it. It was the time we needed to complete our documentation, the legal filings, the broadcast packages, the contact protocols. She paused. After that, it was done. It existed, permanently, in the record. You were buying time to make a record. We were buying time to make something that couldn't be unmade, she said. He stood in the field for a very long time. Around them, the sun had moved. The orange had gone out of the sky, and what was left was the clear, flat light of human mid-morning. And somewhere in the settlement, a bird was making a sound that was extremely ordinary, and the sound of it in the silence was somehow the strangest thing in the footage, more disorienting than any of the technology, any of the tactics. Just a bird. Just a morning continuing to be a morning. "I need to speak with my fleet command," Dahl said. "Of course," Yale said, "we'll be here." He spoke with them for 37 minutes. The footage does not capture that conversation. What it captures is the outcome. At 8:53 local time, Dahl returned to the field, issued a stand-down order to his ground forces, and transmitted to Sergeant Yale Morrow a formal request to initiate a secondary contact phase under the disputed acquisition protocols of the Empire's own legal framework. The Empire's ground forces remained in position for 40 minutes while the extraction was arranged. During those 40 minutes, the specialists continued talking to the soldiers. The civilians continued watching. The legal teams continued filing. The news continued broadcasting. No one fired a weapon. At 9:41, the last Imperial dropship left the surface. The campaign was over. But Valora is not finished. He has read the classified record and watched the footage and cross-referenced the intercepts, and he knows, sitting in his office with his long cold drink and the notation file he has filled with questions, that the story he has just seen is not the whole story. Because the story he has seen is what the Empire observed. And what the Empire observed in every moment of those 3 hours was not quite what was actually happening. The last file in the archive package is not footage. It is a written account, submitted to the Commission 6 weeks after the campaign, authored by Sergeant Yale Morrow at the Commission's formal request. It is 3 pages long. It is the only document in the archive that does not have a classification stamp. Whoever compiled the package included it without restriction, as though they wanted someone to read it without barriers. He reads it. The first 2 pages are a factual account of the contact period, consistent with the footage, adding context but no surprises. The 3rd page is different. The 3rd page is the answer to the question Valora has been circling since the first frame of footage, since the recording that begins mid-sentence. I was asked what I was thinking when Commander Dahl returned to the field at 8:53, Morrow writes. The honest answer is that I was thinking about the 41 people whose classification I was told not to disclose. I was thinking about them because at 8:23, when the stand-down order had not yet come, and we still did not know which way it would go, I had received a single-line message through the relay network. The message told me they were still in position, that they had been there for 11 days, and they were still in position, and they were ready to stay longer if needed. I want to be precise about what that means. These were not soldiers. They were not trained for extended field conditions. They had been briefed on a contingency role and had chosen, individually, to take it. Some of them had families who did not know where they were. The position they held was physically difficult to maintain. They were doing it because they understood that the credibility of everything else we were doing depended on the credibility of that position existing. It's easy to file legal documents. It's easy to prepare broadcast packages and build relay networks. The part that cannot be manufactured, the part that cannot be faked, is someone choosing to stay in a difficult place for 11 days in case they are needed. Commander Dahl asked me what we do when something matters. The honest answer, which I did not give him because there was not enough time, is this. We find the people who are willing to stay, and then we build everything else around them. Not because they are exceptional, because they are not. Because across our history, in every situation that required it, there have always been people willing to stay. We don't know why. It may not be rational. It does not require them to be brave in the dramatic sense. It requires them to simply not leave. To decide that the discomfort of staying is less than the cost of not being there. The commander asked if they knew we would come. They knew we might come. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. They prepared for a possibility. They stayed for a possibility. And when the possibility arrived, they were in position. I think about this whenever I am asked to explain what happened those 3 hours. I think about 41 people in a difficult space, waiting. Not heroes, not legends, just people who decided not to leave. That is what the Empire encountered. That is what they did not know how to calculate for. That is, I think, what they still don't fully understand. Valora closes the file. He sits for a long time in his office, in a building, in an empire that still exists but which has not, in 32 years, attempted another ground campaign in human territorial space. He thinks about the recording that begins mid-sentence. He thinks about what was already happening before someone thought to start recording, and about everything the Empire observed in those 3 hours and still misunderstood, and about what it means to encounter a species that plans for possibilities rather than certainties, that builds relay networks over years for contingencies that may never arrive, that sends people to sit in difficult spaces just in case asterisk, that watches its own potential erasure with folding chairs and cameras because it cannot bring itself to look away. He thinks about 41 people in a dark space, waiting. Not because they were ordered to, not because they were certain it mattered, because they decided that the cost of not being there was higher than the cost of staying. He thinks about all the things the Empire did not understand in those 3 hours, and the ways those misunderstandings saved his species from making an error it could not have undone. And he wonders, not for the first time, but more clearly than ever before, whether the humans knew, when they designed their response, that the Empire's confusion would be a better protection than any weapon they could have deployed. Whether the whole thing, from the first moment the fleet appeared in human skis, was not a defense but a demonstration. Whether the humans were not trying to stop the Empire. Whether they were trying to teach asterisk it something. He doesn't know. He will probably never know. The record he has spent the day reading begins mid-sentence and ends with a 3-page document that answers some questions and leaves, deliberately or otherwise, the most important one open. What he knows is this: the 9th Galactic Empire, the most enduring military and political structure in known space, departed a planet of beings 2 centuries behind them in technological development after 3 hours, having accomplished nothing, having understood almost nothing, carrying back with them a memory that 32 years have not faded, and a question none of their analysts have been able to fully resolve. Not can we defeat them, but how do you calculate against something that doesn't stop? How do you build a campaign model for a species that files legal challenges and builds relay networks and sends non-soldiers into sealed chambers for 3 weeks, and asks your soldiers about their families and puts folding chairs in fields to watch the end of the world, and writes 3-page accounts that don't quite answer the central question, and trains sergeants to buy 47 minutes with a paper cup and a pleasant expression? How do you conquer something that is already, always, quietly preparing for the possibility that you will try? The Empire sent its fleet to take a world. What the world did was make a record. The record still exists.